Your son has been stealing from you, Richard. Millions. It's all gone. Those were the first words Marcus spoke when I answered the phone. Not hello, not how are you. Just the kind of truth that rips the floor out from under you. I gripped the receiver so hard my hand cramped. The desert air around me felt suddenly heavier, hotter, like it had doubled in weight. My knees buckled, and I dropped onto the porch step, the wood groaning beneath me. Say that again, I whispered. Marcus's voice stayed flat, professional, but I've known the man 40 years. I heard the disgust threaded through his control. Daniel's been siphoning your pension, your insurance payouts, everything you earned in those firehouses. He rerouted the funds into a web of companies he set up. Shells. Fake LLCs. I traced them all back. Richard, your son has been bleeding you dry for years. The words hit harder than any smoke-filled collapse I ever fought my way through. I shut my eyes and for a second I was back inside a burning duplex in Glendale, the beams groaning above me, the floor hot enough to cook through my boots. That moment when you realize the fire isn't just dangerous, it's winning. I forced myself to breathe. How much? Marcus exhaled. I could almost see him pinching the bridge of his nose the way he always did when the truth felt too ugly. North of 3 million. Maybe closer to 4 if you count the properties he leveraged using your accounts as collateral. I pressed my hand against my thigh. I half expected to feel blood because it damn sure felt like I'd been stabbed. That's everything. That's my life's work. Yeah, Marcus said quietly. It is. For a long time, the only sound was the cicadas screaming in the mesquite and the faint whine of traffic from the freeway. I stared at the desert horizon until it blurred, and all I could think about was Daniel, 8 years old, holding my turnout helmet and grinning ear to ear like he was already halfway to being a hero. I'd carried men out of infernos, dragged screaming kids out of basements. And somehow I hadn't seen the flames right under my own roof. Marcus's voice softened. I didn't want to believe it either, Richard. I triple-checked before I called you. But it's solid. He's been doing it piece by piece, slow enough that you wouldn't notice unless you were digging. And he counted on you not digging. I laughed. Bitter, low. He was right about that. Every time I asked about the accounts, Daniel told me not to stress. Said he'd handle the paperwork, that financial advisors just want to skim fees. And like a damn fool, I let him. That's not on you, Marcus said quickly. You trusted your son. But the word trust burned in my ears like a siren. Trust is what held the line when I charged into fire with men at my side. Trust is what let me hand Daniel the keys to my life's work without looking over his shoulder. And trust is what he had just turned into kindling. I swallowed hard, my throat raw. What's he spending it on? Marcus didn't hesitate. The mansion up in Scottsdale. The fleet of cars. He's funneled money into developments too, high-rises, condo projects. Not all of them are legal. I found payoffs to city inspectors, council members. He's playing a dirty game. The sun dipped lower, throwing long shadows across my yard, and I felt something in me shift. A different kind of heat spread through my chest, not grief, not confusion. Rage, steady and controlled, the same kind that kept me moving when smoke choked my lungs and flames licked at my ears. Marcus, I said slowly, don't move on this yet. Don't file anything. Don't tip your hand. You're thinking of handling this yourself? I'm thinking, I said, standing, my joints aching but my voice steady, that alarms don't always scream. Sometimes the best ones stay silent until the fire is right where you want it. Marcus paused. Then, quietly, he said, Richard, what are you planning? I looked out at the horizon, where the heat shimmered over the asphalt, and thought about Daniel's smug smile, the one he wore when he pulled up in that cherry-red Porsche last Thanksgiving. He'd told me it was a business lease. Now I knew whose business it really was. I'm planning, I said, to remind my son that fire doesn't just destroy. Sometimes it cleanses. I hung up before Marcus could reply. My heart was pounding hard, but for the first time in years, I didn't feel old. I felt alive, burning from the inside out. Daniel thought I was too blind to notice, too weak to fight back. But he had forgotten who I was. I wasn't just some retiree sitting in the desert sun, waiting for the years to take me. I was a firefighter. I knew how to face flames. And this fire, his fire, was going to be mine to control. The first time Daniel offered to help with the paperwork, I thought it was kindness. I just turned 60, the aches in my knees were worse, and the pills on the counter carried names too long to pronounce. He showed up one Saturday with a stack of files under his arm and said, "Dad, let me take some of this off your plate." I remember laughing, telling him I wasn't dead yet. He smiled, that practiced grin that could sell sand in a desert, and replied, "I know, but you don't need the stress." Looking back now, that was the first ember. Over the years, he made sure those papers stayed in his hands. Every time I reached for them, he'd find a way to discourage me. "These numbers are complicated, Dad." Or, "Financial advisors are just sharks, you'll lose money trusting them." He knew exactly which buttons to press, my stubbornness, my pride, my desire to believe he was the kind of son who actually gave a damn. And I let him. Hell, I thanked him. Meanwhile, I lived modestly, fixing my own truck, patching up the roof on my little house, buying day-old bread at the grocery store when I had to. I told myself it was all part of retirement, living simple, stretching a pension, no shame in that. But when I finally saw how Daniel was living, the smoke cleared enough to reveal the blaze. It was last spring. "He invited me to dinner," said Amber, his wife, "wanted to see me." I almost didn't go, figuring they just needed another loan. But curiosity pulled me in. I pulled up to their house in Scottsdale, and I swear my jaw hit the steering wheel. Mansion didn't even cover it. The place looked like it had been carved out of a magazine spread, marble pillars, glass walls, a pool lit up in neon blues. A Porsche and a Tesla in the driveway, both gleaming like they'd never seen a raindrop. When Amber opened the door, she was dripping in jewelry, diamonds that sparkled even in the hallway light. She kissed my cheek like a politician greeting a donor, then ushered me into a dining room where a private chef in a white coat plated dishes I couldn't even name. "Dad," Daniel said, arms spread wide as though he hadn't just ignored my calls for weeks. He wore a watch that cost more than the truck I drove in on. His suit jacket probably had a price tag higher than my monthly expenses. He poured me a glass of wine I didn't ask for, then leaned back in his chair, grinning. "So, how's retirement treating you?" I looked around the table at the crystal glasses, the imported silverware, the servants moving quietly in the background, and felt a weight settle in my stomach. Retirement was treating me to leftover chili 3 nights a week and duct tape on my boots. Meanwhile, my son was living like a king. And every bite of that meal, every car in the driveway, every glittering stone on Amber's wrist, was mine. I didn't show it, though. I smiled, played the part of the grateful old man, nodded while they bragged about their real estate ventures and upcoming trips to Cabo. Amber laughed about redecorating the guest wing, not room, as if having a private chef wasn't enough of a flex. I sat there chewing food I couldn't taste, and in my mind, I traced the path Marcus had uncovered. Every laugh, every toast was fueled by my sacrifice. All those nights I dragged my broken body out of a fire only to collapse in the station shower, this was where the money went. When I asked Daniel casually about finances, whether I should be worried about inflation, if maybe I should see a planner, he waved a dismissive hand. "Dad, I told you, you're fine. Don't waste your time on those vultures. Just relax and enjoy life. Enjoy life." Back home, my fridge had half a loaf of bread and some eggs. I was rationing medication to make sure it lasted through the month. Meanwhile, he was paying someone to chop vegetables in his kitchen. That was when the smoke turned into fire. I excused myself after dessert, gave them the same tired smile I'd used on civilians back when I pulled them out of wrecks. The kind of smile that said, "You're safe now," even when the flames were still licking at the windows. But I knew better. By the time I slid behind the wheel of my truck, I wasn't thinking about dessert anymore. I was thinking about every check I'd signed, every time I'd nodded at Daniel's advice, every time I told myself he was just trying to help. He wasn't helping. He was building an empire, brick by brick, on the ashes of my trust. And I knew then, he wasn't just stealing money. He was stealing the years I'd bled for. He was stealing the legacy I wanted to leave behind. He thought he was clever, hiding it in paperwork, smothering the truth under layers of ink and contracts. But the thing about smoke is, it never stays hidden forever. It seeps out. It stains the walls. And if you know how to follow it, you'll always find the fire. I gripped the wheel tighter, my jaw locked as I pulled away from his mansion. Daniel thought he'd fooled me, thought I was just the old man nodding along. But I wasn't nodding anymore. I was watching. Waiting. Breathing in the smoke of his deception. And soon, I'd be the one holding the hose. Daniel always knew how to throw a dinner that looked like love but tasted like business. When he invited me back again a month later, I already knew what I was walking into. Still, I went. Not because I craved his company, but because I needed to see more. Needed to feel the ground he thought was solid under his feet. The drive up to Scottsdale always felt like crossing into another world. My neighborhood in Phoenix was small stucco homes, chain-link fences, yards with plastic chairs bleached pale by the sun. His street was all polished gates and manicured palms, houses built to look like resorts. As soon as I pulled into his driveway, a valet appeared. A valet, for a private home. I stepped out of my truck, the engine coughing out one last sigh, and watched the young man slip into the driver's seat like he was allergic to the cracked leather. The front door opened before I could knock. Amber, draped in a silk dress that probably cost more than my monthly groceries, flashed me a smile. "Richard. We're so glad you came." Her perfume hit me before her words did, something sharp and floral that made my nose itch. Inside, the house was lit up like a magazine spread. Chandeliers glowing warm gold, marble floors polished until you could check your reflection in them. The walls held abstract art that meant nothing but whispered price tags anyway. Daniel came striding down the hallway, Rolex gleaming under the light, grin wide. "Dad! You made it." He hugged me just tight enough to suggest affection but quick enough to avoid sincerity. "Wouldn't miss it," I said, though in my chest, I felt the weight of every reason I should have missed it. The dining room looked like a stage. At the head of the table, a chair just slightly larger than the others, Daniel's throne. At the other end, a private chef in crisp whites arranging plates like paintings. On the table, caviar, lobster tails, steaks so rare they might have still been breathing. Crystal glasses filled with wine older than amber. I sat down, the old leather of my wallet pressing against my hip, and thought about how many of my dollars were floating in the wine swirling in their glasses. "Try the Bordeaux, Dad," Daniel said, raising his glass. "Vintage 96. Pairs beautifully with the Wagyu." I lifted my glass and smiled like an obedient guest. But inside, I was cataloging every detail, every indulgence he paraded in front of me, every flash of wealth that screamed louder than his words. Amber leaned in across the table. "You should spend more time here, Richard. We've got more rooms than we use. You'd be comfortable." Her eyes flicked toward Daniel, who smirked into his wine. I knew what that meant. Keep Dad close, keep him pliable. They thought I was naive enough to accept scraps of their false generosity while they siphoned the rest. Through the whole dinner, I played the grateful old man. I laughed when Daniel bragged about his newest property deal downtown. I nodded when Amber talked about her charity work, which, from what I gathered, meant throwing parties where rich people pretended to care. But every smile I gave them was a mask. Behind it, my mind was working like it used to in the firehouse, scanning exits, spotting hazards, planning next moves. When you've pulled people out of collapsing stairwells, you learn how to watch everything without letting anyone see your eyes move. Halfway through dinner, Daniel put down his fork and steepled his fingers like he was closing a deal. "Dad, you should really stop worrying about finances. I've got everything handled. Just enjoy your life. Travel a little, buy yourself something nice." "Maybe I will," I said, my voice even. "Maybe I'll sell the old house and take a trip." The reaction was small but sharp. Daniel's fork froze halfway to his mouth. Amber's eyes darted to his before she forced a smile. That was the moment I knew, despite all their wealth, they were already counting what would be left when I was gone. I let the silence hang, just long enough for Daniel to shift in his seat. Then I smiled again, the mask back in place, and said, "But that's for later. Tonight, I just want to enjoy this wonderful meal." The chef brought out dessert, something with gold flakes sprinkled on top, for no reason other than to show they could. I ate slowly, tasting nothing, watching everything. Because this wasn't dinner. This was reconnaissance. When I finally stood to leave, Daniel clapped me on the shoulder. "See, Dad? You don't need to stress about anything. You raised me to take care of things. Let me handle it." I looked him square in the eye and said, "You're right, son. You've got it all under control." He smiled, satisfied, and walked me to the door. Amber kissed my cheek again, sweet as poison. The valet brought my truck around, its engine coughing and sputtering against the smooth hum of their imported cars. I climbed in, waved politely, and drove away. But as the mansion disappeared in my rearview mirror, the mask fell off my face. My jaw clenched, my hands gripped the wheel, and the fire in my chest flared hotter. Daniel thought I was fooled by his performance, lulled by his wealth, softened by his fake hospitality. But I wasn't. In that dining room, behind all the glitter and the wine, I'd seen the truth. My son was living a life built on my back. And while he laughed behind his mask, I was already planning how to tear the whole stage down. When you've spent your life in firehouses, you learn two things: how to read the smoke, and how to trust the crew that walks in with you. Marcus knew that. Maybe that's why, a week after that dinner at Daniel's mansion, he asked me to meet him at his office on Camelback Road. His office was old school, oak desk, thick blinds, a faded photograph of us from our 20s taped to a filing cabinet. In it, I still had dark hair and Marcus still had knees that worked. He stood as I came in, face tight but eyes steady. "You're not alone in this, Richard," he said. "I brought someone." That's when she walked in. Naomi Pierce. Mid-40s, sharp suit, sharper eyes. She didn't shake my hand so much as size me up, like she was already gauging whether I'd be worth her time. "Naomi's the best forensic investigator I know," Marcus said. "If Daniel's dirty, she'll find it." Naomi dropped a folder onto the desk, its edges fat with papers and tabs. "He's dirty," she said flatly. "The question isn't if. It's how deep." I leaned forward, heart pounding. "Show me." She flipped open the folder and walked me through the wreckage of Daniel's empire. It wasn't just stolen pensions anymore. He'd built a lattice of shell companies, LLCs with names like Desert Star Holdings and Skyline Management, all funded through transfers from my accounts. The money had been laundered into high-rise projects downtown. But the real kicker? She slid a page across to me, covered in city seals and signatures. "Permits," she said. "Dozens of them. Rushed approvals, no inspections, rubber-stamped by officials who shouldn't be anywhere near real estate." Marcus frowned. "Bribes?" Naomi nodded. "Bribes." I followed the money. Daniel's been greasing palms across Phoenix City Hall. Council members, inspectors, zoning clerks. He's not just stealing from you, he's breaking federal law. Fraud, bribery, racketeering. If this blows up, he won't just lose his fortune. He could go to prison. I stared at the paperwork, bile rising in my throat. For 30 years, I'd fought to protect people from fire. And here was my son, building towers of glass and steel on foundations of lies. I thought of those buildings collapsing someday, not from flames but from corruption. Innocent people walking through doors supported by fraud. Jesus Christ, I muttered. Naomi sat back in her chair, her eyes never leaving me. The good news is, he's arrogant. Men like him always leave trails because they think no one's looking. But now we are. Marcus added, we can take this to the authorities, but that's the nuclear option. Once it's in their hands, you lose control. The question is, what do you want, Richard? I looked between them. For years, Daniel had treated me like dead weight, like the old man who couldn't understand the world anymore. But this wasn't about understanding. This was about fire control. I took a breath. I don't want him ruined by accident. I want him to feel it. I want him to know exactly who lit the match. Naomi raised an eyebrow, almost smiling. Then we'll need strategy. Controlled burn. The phrase hit me like a memory from my firefighting days. A controlled burn clears out the underbrush before it can fuel a bigger disaster. Risky, but effective. That's when I knew I trusted her. Over the next hour, we planned. Naomi would dig deeper, tracing every illegal transaction. Marcus would prepare the legal net, quietly, carefully, ready to spring when the time came. My job was simpler, play the role of the oblivious father. Stay small, stay quiet, let Daniel keep thinking I was blind. The thought burned my pride, but it was necessary. Fires don't reveal themselves until they're ready. Before I left, Naomi handed me a USB drive. On here are copies of his shell company filings, his wire transfers, his bribe payments. Don't lose it. Don't show it to anyone. Consider it the first bucket of water. I slipped it into my pocket, its weight heavier than my wallet. Walking out of Marcus's office into the brutal Arizona sun, I felt something I hadn't felt in months. Power. Not the brute kind you get from hauling ladders or breaking down doors, but the quiet kind that comes from knowing more than your enemy. Daniel thought he'd burned me down to ashes. But ashes can smolder. Ashes can reignite. That night, as I sat on my porch with the desert air cooling against my skin, I thought about all the times I'd saved people who never even learned my name. The irony wasn't lost on me, I'd risked my life for strangers, and my own son was the one trying to kill my future. But he'd made one fatal mistake. He thought he was the only one wearing a mask. I smiled into the dark, the fire in my chest burning steady. The firehouse strategy was set. Daniel's empire was built on tinder. All I had to do was wait for the right spark. The hardest part of revenge is pretending you're too weak to want it. For weeks after Naomi laid out Daniel's crimes, I became someone else, an older, softer version of myself. I walked slower, let my hands tremble when I lifted a coffee mug, even started asking neighbors to help with chores I'd been doing alone for years. The trick to playing fragile is consistency. You can't let the mask slip, not even when no one's watching, because word has a way of traveling. And with Daniel, I needed the right word to reach him. So I planted it myself. I told a friend from the firehouse, a man who still knew half the gossip in Phoenix, that I was thinking of selling my old house. I said maybe I'd donate the money to the firefighters' memorial fund, something I'd always respected but never been able to give to. I told him this in a voice just loud enough for a waitress to overhear at the diner. By the next morning, I knew it would spread like smoke through a vent. It didn't take long. 3 days later, Daniel called me. Not a text. Not an email. An actual phone call, the first one in months. "Dad," he said, his tone warm but tight. I heard you're thinking about selling the house. I feigned surprise. Oh, you heard about that, huh? Just an idea. No sense letting it sit empty when I could do some good with it. A pause, then, good? What do you mean, good? I was thinking of giving the proceeds to the memorial fund. They could use it. Another pause, longer this time. I could picture him grinding his teeth. Finally, he forced out, Dad, that's not smart. You don't know what kind of scams those places run. Better to keep it in the family. Safer that way. Maybe, I said lightly, as if the thought barely mattered to me. But I've been feeling tired lately. Figured it'd be nice to settle things while I still can. That was the hook. He couldn't resist it. Over the next week, Daniel and Amber became more attentive than they had in years. Suddenly they wanted dinners, wanted to check on me, wanted to know if I'd seen a doctor lately. Every question was wrapped in fake concern, but the greed was thick underneath. Amber played her part with saccharine sweetness. She'd text me pictures of healthy recipes for seniors, and remind me to take it easy on my heart. Daniel, meanwhile, started pushing harder, suggesting I let him look over my finances one last time, offering to introduce me to his accountant. I pretended to waver. Sometimes I'd agree. Sometimes I'd say no. The trick was to keep him chasing, never sure if I'd slip through his fingers. Meanwhile, Naomi worked in the background, digging deeper. She told me not to rush, not to confront. You're baiting him into moving faster, she explained. The more desperate he gets, the sloppier he'll be. And she was right. One evening, I forgot to lock my front door and left a folder of fake paperwork sitting on the kitchen table. Inside were copies Naomi had mocked up, documents suggesting I was about to list my house with a realtor, with a buyer already interested. I went to bed early and made sure the porch light stayed on. The next morning, the folder was still there, but the papers weren't in the same order. Someone had flipped through them. I didn't say a word. Later that week, Daniel showed up unannounced. He walked through my door like he owned it, sat across from me, and said, Dad, you're not thinking clearly. You shouldn't be making these decisions alone. It's dangerous. I let my shoulders slump. Maybe you're right. It's just hard, son. I get confused sometimes. Numbers aren't what they used to be. He leaned forward, eyes gleaming. Then let me handle it. I'll take care of everything. I nodded slowly, as if I were too tired to resist. Inside, I could feel the fire building. Every word, every false note of concern was another gallon of fuel. When he left, Amber sent me a text not an hour later, We love you, Richard. We just want what's best for you. Best for me. Right. That night, I sat on the porch under the desert stars and let the anger settle into something colder, sharper. I'd spent years fighting fires that threatened to take everything from families. Now I was setting one of my own. And like every controlled burn I'd ever lit, I knew the wind was about to change. When your enemy believes you're weak, that's when they finally show their true hand. 2 weeks after I'd let slip about selling my house, Daniel and Amber staged what they proudly called an intervention. They invited me over for dinner again, but this time the tone was different the moment I stepped through the door. No chef bustling in the kitchen, no champagne waiting in flutes, no glittering centerpiece meant to blind me with wealth. The dining room looked stripped down, almost clinical. At the center of the table sat a neat stack of papers, a pen laid beside them like a loaded gun. Daniel cleared his throat as if rehearsing. Dad, we need to talk. Amber sat poised beside him, posture perfect, lips painted a shade too dark. She pressed her manicured hand against the papers and offered a small, pitying smile that would have fooled a stranger. We're worried about you, Richard. We really are. I lowered myself into the chair across from them, my movements deliberate. I let my shoulders sag, let my hands tremble slightly against the wood grain. On the inside, though, my pulse was steady. Naomi's cameras were already recording every word. That was no small feat. Daniel's mansion was a fortress of glass and steel, with smart locks, motion sensors, and cameras of its own. But Naomi was clever. She had posed as an interior designer from a luxury firm, the kind Amber loved to brag about hiring. She'd come over for a consultation, complimented Amber on her taste, and suggested a few upgrades to make the space more modern. In reality, those upgrades were her cover. The new smoke detector in the hallway. Camera. The elegant lamp she loaned them to showcase ambient lighting. Camera. Even a tiny decorative vent cover in the dining room ceiling had been swapped for one with a pinhole lens hidden inside. Each device fed directly into a secure channel Naomi controlled, invisible to their own system. Amber had been too flattered by Naomi's praise to suspect anything. Daniel had been too distracted showing off his wine cellar to notice her slipping a second vent cover into her bag. By the time she left, half a dozen eyes were watching the house from the inside out. Now, those hidden eyes saw everything. Worried? I asked, letting my voice sound fragile. Amber leaned forward like a nurse about to deliver bad news. You've been forgetful. You've been talking about giving away your assets. That's not safe. You're vulnerable, Richard. And we love you too much to let you make mistakes you'll regret. Daniel nodded, his expression carefully sculpted into what he must have thought was concern. Dad, you're not yourself anymore. That's not criticism, it's just age. We want to help. But you need guidance. Legal guidance. He pushed the stack of papers across the table, the corner scraping the polished surface. All we need is your signature, and we'll take care of everything for you. I stared at the papers like they were written in another language. My hand hovered above the pen, shaking just enough to look authentic. What is this exactly? Amber was ready. She unfolded a separate sheet, smoothed it with delicate fingers, and slid it toward me. Just guardianship papers. Nothing frightening. It means Daniel and I will handle the finances and make sure everything runs smoothly. I picked up the other sheet she offered, a doctor's note, on official letterhead declaring me incompetent to manage my own affairs. The signature at the bottom was unfamiliar, and I knew from Naomi it would be proven forged. Still, I squinted at it, frowning like an old man too confused to argue. I don't remember seeing this doctor, I said slowly. Amber tilted her head, sympathy dripping like poison. That's because we arranged it, Richard. You were disoriented that day. But don't worry, it's all official. Daniel slid the pen closer, his mask slipping for just a second. Dad, this is the right move. You don't want to risk losing everything, do you? Just sign. Let us protect you. For a long moment, I let silence hang. I stared at the pen as though it carried the weight of the world. Their eyes shone with hunger disguised as love, Amber's with thinly veiled triumph, Daniel's with greedy anticipation. I reached for the pen, let my fingers brush it. Both of them leaned forward, breath held. Then I stopped, set it back down slowly. It's a lot to take in, I murmured. My hand's too shaky tonight. Maybe tomorrow. Amber masked her irritation with another smile. Of course, tomorrow. We understand. Daniel's jaw tightened before he forced a sigh. Yeah, tomorrow. No rush. I stood, shaky and slow, and shuffled toward the door. Behind me, their whispers floated through the silence. He's close, Amber hissed. Don't push him too hard. Almost there, she'd said. I stepped into the night air, letting the mask slide off my face at last. My jaw was iron, my fists clenched. They thought I was cornered, trapped by forged notes and staged sympathy. What they didn't know was that every second had been captured on Naomi's cameras, their manipulation, their fraud, their eagerness to steal from me. Back home, I phoned Marcus. They made their move, I said. And every damn word is on tape. There was a pause, then Marcus let out the kind of breath you only hear after carrying weight too heavy for too long. Good. Then the trap is set. That night, I sat on my porch with the desert wind cool against my skin. The stars above shimmered like sparks waiting to fall. For weeks I'd been pretending weakness, playing the fool. But now the game had shifted. The fire wasn't just smoldering anymore. It was catching. And the flames were pointed straight at Daniel. The letter came in a stiff white envelope stamped with the Maricopa County Superior Court seal. I knew before I opened it what it would say. Daniel had finally made his move. Petition for legal guardianship of Richard Cole. I read it twice, my jaw tightening with each line. According to the papers, I was no longer capable of handling my own affairs. I was a danger to myself. I was senile, confused, incompetent. Daniel wanted the court to hand him control of my assets, my medical decisions, even where I lived. He had put it all down in black ink, signed his name at the bottom with the same confidence he once had when forging my signature on checks. I carried the envelope straight to Marcus's office. He skimmed it, shaking his head. He's going all in. This is the kind of petition people file when their parent is drooling in a nursing home, not when he's still walking around on his own 2 feet. Then he thinks I'm already buried, I said. Marcus leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers. Good. Let him think that. We'll let him walk into court believing he's the executioner. He won't realize he's the condemned. The hearing was set for 2 weeks later. Naomi spent that time tightening the case, organizing footage, tracing bribes, stacking evidence like logs for the fire we were about to light. Meanwhile, I played my role. At the grocery store, I asked the clerk to help me count change. At the diner, I forgot my order. I let the whispers travel, feeding Daniel's case without lifting a finger. When the day came, the courthouse was cool and sterile, the air thick with the smell of polished floors and paper. I walked in wearing my old dress blues, the ones I hadn't worn since my retirement ceremony. The jacket was snug now, the medals dulled, but I wore it for a reason. I wanted the judge to see a man who had lived his life in service, not the caricature Daniel had painted. Daniel and Amber were already seated at their table, lawyers flanking them like guard dogs. Amber wore a gray suit, her hair pulled back tight, eyes gleaming. Daniel leaned back in his chair, smug as a man who already sees the finish line. He didn't even look at me until I sat down. When he did, he gave me a smile so thin it was practically a scar. The judge entered, and the hearing began. Daniel's lawyer wasted no time. He painted me as a confused old man, unfit to manage my own finances. He presented the forged doctor's note as if it were gospel, then paraded out witnesses, men in suits I recognized from Naomi's files. A city councilman testified that I had called him 3 times in 1 week, forgetting the subject each time. An inspector claimed I had wandered onto one of Daniel's job sites, disoriented. A psychiatrist I'd never met took the stand and said I showed textbook symptoms of early dementia. All of it was rehearsed, polished, bought and paid for. And I sat there quietly, letting it wash over me, my face carefully blank. Every lie they spoke, every falsehood they swore under oath, it was another shovel of dirt on the grave Daniel thought he was digging for me. At one point, Amber even took the stand. She dabbed at her eyes with a tissue as she told the judge how she'd caught me leaving the stove on for hours and found me wandering outside at night. Her performance was worthy of an actress, complete with trembling voice and long, pitying glances in my direction. Marcus leaned toward me and whispered, "You want me to object?" I shook my head. "Let them finish," I whispered back. "Let them bury themselves." When the judge finally asked if I had anything to say, I stood slowly. "Your Honor," I said, my voice calm, steady, "I trust my lawyer to speak for me." Then I sat back down. A ripple of confusion spread across the room. Daniel's attorney smirked, thinking I was conceding. Amber's shoulders loosened, her tissue fluttering back to the table. Daniel leaned back, confident he'd won. But I wasn't conceding. I was waiting. Because Naomi hadn't even opened her briefcase yet. As we walked out of the courtroom that afternoon, Daniel clapped me on the back as though we were still father and son. "Don't worry, Dad," he said softly, his voice thick with mock concern. "After next week, everything will be simpler. You won't have to worry about a thing." I turned to him, my eyes steady on his. "You're right, son. Things are about to get much simpler." He grinned, thinking he'd cornered me. But what he didn't know, what he couldn't know, was that I'd already pulled the pin on the grenade. And court was about to become ground zero. The second day of the hearing was the one Daniel had been waiting for. He walked into the courtroom with Amber on his arm, both dressed like they were attending a gala instead of trying to strip me of my life. His lawyer carried a binder thick enough to break a man's foot if dropped. I came in quietly, medals on my chest again, Marcus at my side, and Naomi trailing behind with a single slim folder. That folder, I knew, weighed more than everything Daniel had stacked against me. The judge opened the session. Daniel's lawyer strutted to the center, voice booming, "Your Honor, as we showed yesterday, Mr. Cole is no longer capable of handling his affairs. My client has stepped in out of love and duty, and we ask the court to grant him guardianship immediately." He sat, smug as a cat with feathers stuck to its lips. Marcus stood. "Your Honor, the defense has a different picture to present. A picture of fraud, coercion, and abuse. With your permission, we'll begin with exhibits." The judge nodded. Marcus gestured to Naomi. She walked up, calm and unhurried, and opened the folder. Inside were the matches to Daniel's house of tinder. "Exhibit A," Marcus said, sliding a series of financial records onto the bench. "Transfers from Mr. Cole's pension and insurance accounts to shell corporations controlled by the petitioner, Mr. Daniel Cole." The judge frowned, flipping through the pages. "Numbers don't lie." Daniel shifted in his seat, his jaw twitching. Marcus didn't pause. "Exhibit B, records of payments to Phoenix City officials. Council members, inspectors, zoning clerks. Each payment routed through those same shell companies. Your Honor, this is not the behavior of a loving son. This is organized fraud." Whispers rippled through the courtroom. One of Daniel's so-called witnesses, an inspector who had testified the day before, sank lower in his seat. Then Naomi pulled out the real bombshell. She set a small monitor on the evidence table and pressed play. On screen, Daniel and Amber sat in their dining room across from me. Their words filled the courtroom. "Dad, you're not yourself anymore. We just need you to sign. You were confused, remember? The doctor said it's best. All it takes is one signature." The video caught every detail, Amber smoothing out the forged note, Daniel pushing the pen toward me, their hungry eyes gleaming when they thought I might give in. The judge leaned forward, her expression hardening. "This recording, how was it obtained?" Naomi stepped up. "I was retained by Mr. Cole's counsel to investigate suspicious financial activity. These cameras were installed legally with Mr. Cole's knowledge, and in areas of the petitioner's residence where guests, such as Mr. Cole, were invited. This was not private space. This was evidence of coercion." Daniel shot to his feet. "That's illegal. You can't." "Sit down, Mr. Cole," the judge snapped. "You'll have your turn." Amber's face drained of color. She whispered something to Daniel, her hand gripping his arm like an anchor, but it was too late. The video was burned into everyone's minds. Marcus wasn't finished. He called a handwriting expert to the stand. The expert placed two documents side by side, the forged doctor's note Amber had waved around, and a mortgage application in my name. Both bore the same fake signature. Amber Cole, the expert concluded, is the author of both. Amber gasped, eyes wide, shaking her head. That's not true. That's a lie. The judge banged her gavel. Order. By then, the tide had turned. Every witness Daniel had bought looked nervous. The psychiatrist suddenly claimed his testimony had been misinterpreted. The councilman who swore I called him 3 times couldn't explain why phone records showed only 1 call, and it was to confirm a charity event. Daniel sat rigid, his lawyer whispering frantically in his ear. I sat silently, hands folded, watching it all unravel. Because this wasn't my fire to fight anymore. This was theirs, and it was spreading fast. Finally, Marcus closed the folder. Your Honor, this isn't about an old man losing his faculties. This is about greed. This is about a son who stole millions from his father, then tried to bury him alive in legal paperwork. Mr. Cole doesn't need a guardian. He needs justice. The judge's gaze cut across the courtroom, lingering on Daniel, then Amber. I've heard enough for today. We will reconvene tomorrow for closing arguments. But let me be clear, what I've seen today raises serious questions of fraud and perjury. Mr. Cole, she looked directly at Daniel, you should consider your next words very carefully. The gavel fell, sharp and final. As people filed out, Daniel's eyes met mine across the room. For the first time, I didn't see smugness. I saw panic, the kind that spreads when the smoke alarm shrieks and you realize the fire is already in the walls. I didn't say a word. I didn't need to. Because Naomi had just turned his empire into an inferno. The next morning, the courthouse felt heavier, as if the walls themselves had absorbed every lie Daniel and Amber spewed the day before. The marble floors echoed louder under my boots, the air cooler, sharp enough to sting the lungs. People avoided my gaze as I walked past, some ashamed of the things they testified, others curious if I'd go down quietly. I wore my old dress blues again. They were tight across the shoulders now, the metals dulled with time, but they weren't for show. They were armor. They were a reminder of who I was, and of everything Daniel had gambled against. Marcus walked at my side, jaw tight, and Naomi trailed just behind, her small folder tucked under her arm like a live grenade. Daniel arrived with a swagger he hadn't earned. His lawyer carried another binder stuffed with papers, but Daniel himself looked polished, confident, like a man already rehearsing his victory speech. Amber clung to his arm in a storm gray suit, her eyes darting anywhere but mine. I could almost smell the fear coming off her. When the judge entered and the gavel struck, the sound rang like steel on steel. Daniel's lawyer went first, spinning and twisting, trying to patch the holes Naomi had blasted open the day before. Your Honor, the defense has relied on selective interpretation. My client's generosity and concern have been distorted. That video, taken out of context, shows only snippets of a larger, compassionate conversation. His voice rang hollow. Even he seemed to know it. Marcus began to rise, but I stopped him with a hand on his arm. Let me speak, I whispered. He hesitated, then nodded. I stood slowly, the metals on my chest catching the courtroom light, and let the silence build until every eye turned toward me. Your Honor, I said, my voice low but steady, I've listened long enough. Yesterday my son paraded a forged doctor's note and bought witnesses to call me incompetent. He tried to bury me under a mountain of lies. Today I want to tell you who I really am, and who he really is. I turned slightly so the whole room could hear. I was a firefighter in Phoenix for 33 years. I've walked through smoke so thick it turned the world black. I've felt the skin peel off my arms from burns that never fully healed. I've carried bodies, some living, some not, out of houses collapsing around me. And through it all, I believed in service. I believed in leaving something better behind. The courtroom was silent, the kind of silence I used to hear before a roof gave way. I saved money from every paycheck, every pension contribution, every insurance payout from injuries that left me in hospitals. That money was meant for the years when I could no longer run into fire. It was meant for security. For dignity. Then I turned my eyes directly to Daniel. He flinched. My son decided it belonged to him. He siphoned it away, dollar by dollar, hidden in companies with fake names. He used it to grease politicians, to build towers of glass and steel on foundations of lies. And when he feared I'd leave what little remained to someone else, he dragged me here to paint me senile. Amber shifted uncomfortably, her knuckles white as she gripped Daniel's arm. You wanted to control my future, Daniel, I continued, my voice rising. But what you didn't know is that I already secured it. Marcus handed me a folder. I opened it carefully and slid the documents across the evidence table. Months ago, before this hearing, I placed every remaining asset in a trust. That trust doesn't belong to Daniel. It doesn't belong to Amber. It belongs to the Firefighters Children Foundation, a fund for kids who lost their parents in the line of duty. Children who deserve more than the kind of son I raised. Gasps rippled through the gallery. Someone actually clapped a hand over their mouth. Daniel shot up from his chair, face flushed. You what? He barked. I didn't blink. You heard me. You'll inherit nothing, Daniel. Nothing but the knowledge that the fortune you thought you could steal will now clothe, feed, and educate children you never cared about. The judge's gaze sharpened, but she stayed silent, letting me continue. And there's one more thing, I said, pulling a small device from my pocket. Naomi had queued it up for me, a recording from another hidden camera she'd planted. I pressed play. Daniel's voice poured into the courtroom, smug and venomous. The old man's too weak to fight back. He should have died in the firehouse years ago. At least then I wouldn't have to clean up his mess. The room froze. The air itself seemed to vanish. Amber's head snapped toward Daniel, her eyes wide, horrified. The gallery shifted uncomfortably, whispers spreading like embers on dry grass. The judge leaned forward, voice sharp. Mr. Cole, do you deny that this is your voice? Daniel opened his mouth, but no sound came. His skin had gone pale, his lips pressed tight as if words themselves were betraying him. He looked smaller suddenly, deflated. I held his gaze one last time. You thought you could burn me down, Daniel. But fire doesn't just destroy. It purifies. And it shows the world exactly what was hidden in the smoke. I turned back to the judge. I rest my case. The gavel struck once, hard, final. And just like that, the flames turned. The last day in court didn't feel like a hearing, it felt like judgment. The gallery was packed, buzzing with whispers that quieted only when the judge walked in. Reporters filled the back rows, notebooks open, cameras ready to catch the fall of a man who had climbed too high on someone else's shoulders. Daniel looked smaller than I'd ever seen him. His suit hung loose, his tie crooked, as if even the clothes had given up on him. He shifted in his chair, avoiding my eyes, glancing nervously at Amber. She sat stiff, her face drained of its usual polish, fingers twisting the strap of her purse over and over until the leather creaked. The judge settled, and the gavel struck. This court has heard enough. Every head snapped forward. She turned her gaze on Daniel. Mr. Cole, you petitioned to take guardianship of your father, alleging he was incompetent. Instead, overwhelming evidence shows that you and your wife engaged in fraud, forgery, coercion, and bribery. This court not only denies your petition but refers these matters to the district attorney for criminal investigation. Amber's breath caught audibly. Daniel's jaw dropped open, words dying before they formed. The judge's tone sharpened. Effective immediately, your accounts are frozen. Any properties acquired through fraudulent means are seized pending review. And perjury charges for your witnesses are under consideration. You may prepare for criminal proceedings. The gavel cracked down again, final as a coffin lid. The room erupted. Reporters swarmed, questions firing like sparks. Daniel, did you steal millions from your father? Mr. Cole, what about the forged signatures? Are you facing prison time? Amber tried to push through the crowd, heels clattering, face pale with humiliation. Daniel followed, stammering, no comment, while cameras shoved in his face. The same reporters who once praised his developments now tore him apart, hungry for the story of his downfall. I stepped aside with Marcus and Naomi. Marcus clapped my shoulder. It's done. He'll be indicted within weeks. Fraud, elder abuse, bribery, you name it. He's finished. Naomi smirked faintly, arms crossed. You burned him down to the foundation, Richard. And the best part? He lit half of the fire himself. I nodded but didn't smile yet. Because revenge isn't complete in the courtroom, it's complete when you reclaim what was nearly stolen. Months passed. The headlines screamed Daniel's name, each story another nail in his coffin. His mansion was stripped, his cars repossessed, his bank accounts emptied into escrow for restitution. Amber filed for divorce within weeks, distancing herself like a rat fleeing a sinking ship. Daniel himself ended up in a cramped apartment, waiting for trial, a man who once commanded millions now rationing groceries from a corner store. And me? I stood before the firefighters' memorial hall on a blazing summer day, the new wing gleaming in sunlight. Bronze plaques lined the walls, etched with names of those who gave everything. The expansion, funded entirely by the assets Daniel thought would pad his empire, was dedicated to children of fallen firefighters, scholarships, housing, counseling, a chance at futures brighter than flames. At my side stood my grandson, Daniel's boy. 17, tall, his jaw set hard against the shame of his father's name. He'd been away at university during the storm, busy with his first semester, and told me later he only learned the truth when the headlines exploded and classmates shoved their phones in his face. At first, he said he felt sick, ashamed to even share the name Cole. He'd called me after the trial, his voice breaking as he said, I don't want to end up like him. I want to be proud of who I am. Now he held the scissors with me, his hand trembling but steadying when I covered it with my own. Together, we cut the ribbon. The crowd erupted in cheers. The flags rippled in the desert wind, and the sound of applause swelled until it drowned out every bitter memory of Daniel's betrayal. As people gathered, reporters snapped photos, not of a disgraced developer but of a firefighter and his grandson, standing side by side. I caught sight of a retired crew from Station 14, men who once dragged hoses beside me in 100-degree heat. They saluted, and I saluted back, the gesture grounding me deeper than any verdict could. Later that evening, as I sat on the porch of my modest home, I imagined Daniel watching the ceremony on TV from his dingy apartment. No Amber, no luxury, no admirers, just silence, broken only by the sound of his own downfall. He would have seen his son beside me, smiling in a way he never did around him. That image alone was worth more than any verdict. Daniel had tried to bury me in ashes, certain I was too weak to rise. But I rose anyway. And I used the fire he set to build something he could never touch. In the end, he wasn't just stripped of money or power. He was stripped of legacy, of pride, of the illusion that he had ever truly won. And me? I wasn't just avenged. I was reborn.